Welcome back to another episode of Fishing the 262. In today's episode, we're going to take a little bit of a dive into jig fishing, and I'm going to hopefully share some tips with you guys that'll help speed up your learning curve when it comes to jig fishing. We're going to start with my journey as a jig fisherman, a jig maker. We're going to talk about colors, lines, rods, reels, all of it. So let's just jump right into it. Now, for me as a young angler, fishing a jig was not something that I ever did. I was just a straight winder. I was going to have a crankbait or a spinnerbait in my hand, and that was just the way that was going to be. Once in a while, I might take a little swim jig around and wind a swim jig, but in terms of bottom fishing a jig, it just wasn't something that I did. It wasn't something that I had a lot of confidence in, and it wasn't something that I probably even fully understood. And as time went by, I realized the power of the jig and the size fish that the jig was going to produce for me, and it's something that over time I've gotten better at. I don't think I'm a great jig fisherman by any stretch of the imagination, but I think as I've progressed on my journey, I've become pretty serviceable, especially shallow jig fishing. I'm still not great offshore, but that's something I'm working on this summer here is dragging football jigs and finding some deeper weed lines and casting those weed lines with a jig and just taking my shallow strategy out deep kind of for the most part. But so let's jump into the jigs. I run basically three colors in my box. And I keep a few one-offs in there, but I try to keep it basic. One of the things I found over time was I was tying up tons of jigs that I thought were beautiful and they were great looking jigs, but I would find myself opening up my jig box and staring at it, not even knowing which one to pick. So paralysis through analysis is what I call that. We've touched on that a little bit in the past, I'm pretty sure, on this channel. So I've really dumbed it down, if you will, to three basic patterns, and I use these patterns based on water clarity. So dark, dirty, dingy water, you guessed it, just your basic black and blue. I do like the matte black. When I paint my own jig heads, I like the matte black a little bit better than the shiny black. That's just probably in my head. You can go with either or. My main jig, my go-to jig, the jig that I'm going to probably throw 85% of the time is this one right here. It's just this is a flat green pumpkin mixed with regular green pumpkin paint with some purple in it. Nothing fancy about it. And then if I find myself in super clear water, I've got a couple bodies of water around me, one in particular that's literally gin clear and you can see 30 feet down on a calm day. I'm going to go for something a little more natural. This is a jig that I pour and paint, but this skirt is actually just a Boss pre-made skirt. I took the band off it and tied it on, but I like that kind of little bluegilly look in that super clear water. That's a Mango Magic paint job. With a Boss skirt. So those are my three colors, you guys. I don't do anything fancy with colors. I don't think you need to do anything fancy. I think if you keep 2, 3, maybe 4 jigs at maximum in your box, you're going to be a better jig fisherman. You're just going to know which color to pick based off water clarity, and you can change some color options by changing the trailer on your jig. So on the subject of trailers, that's really going to be up to you on what your style is. I like to keep a couple of different trailers in the boat, but primarily speaking, I like a chunk when the weather's a little cold and the water's a little cooler. It's just got a much more subtle action. It's not nearly as aggressive. So I think you need a good chunk. I like a Zoom, super basic, readily available, easy to find. And then I also like the NetBait Pack-A-Chunk. It's a little 3-inch chunk trailer that works really good. It's got a little more action to it. And then the other 2 jig trailers that I primarily carry in my boat are going to be a Berkley Chigger Craw Max Scent, normally over power bait, but I'll take either one. I don't really think it matters all that much unless smallmouth are in play. Then I want a Max Scent for sure. And then the other one I like, if I want a real ton of action, is just a Strike King Rage Craw. Comes in great packaging, tons of color options, and it has a ton of action. So those are my trailers. Keep your trailers basic. You can keep some different colors around just to change up the presentation of your jig a little bit without changing the actual color of your jig. So trailers are really simple, you guys. Don't get too involved or too wrapped up in that. find something you like and just stick with it. Buy a bunch of them and know that it works. I think confidence is key to fishing. I don't care if you're fishing a worm, a jig, a drop shot, a chatterbait. Having something you have confidence in really truly matters. So keep the trailers, keep your colors, keep everything really kind of simple, and just really work on your presentation and your confidence. I think that's going to help you a ton. Now let's get into the rod. I have mine sitting right here. This is a rod that I built. It is a North Fork Composites X-Ray Blank, 7'3", heavy, fast action, and I keep a Daiwa Tatula SV 100 on there with an 8-speed. I do like to get that jig back to the boat so I can make another presentation, especially if I'm skipping docks or something like that. So this is my main go-to jig rod. I'm going to have this in my rod, or in my hand, I should say, almost all the time. I do have over in the corner there, I have a 7-foot North Fork Composites 7-foot medium heavy that I use if I'm skipping docks, primarily skipping docks. I like a little shorter rod. I'm a little more accurate. It's easier to skip. And a lot of times I'm throwing a 3/8 ounce jig, so I don't need something quite as beefy as this 7.3 heavy. So I do downsize to a 7-foot medium heavy when I'm skipping docks. But this is a rod, you guys. Spend some money on your jig rod. Your bottom contact rods, sensitivity truly does matter. There's some moving bait rods that you can make up the difference on and save some money, like on your crankbait rods, your chatterbait rods. When you're moving it and sensitivity is not nearly as important, I think that's a good time to opt for a less expensive rod. But when it comes to bottom fishing, worm fishing, jig fishing, anything that's finesse related, spend a little extra money if you can afford to. Buy the best blank that you can possibly get your hands on, something that's in your budget. I'm not saying go out and spend $650 if you can't afford it, but buy in your price range and buy the top rod that you can afford, and then get yourself a nice reel. This is a rod that's worth investing in my opinion, you guys. Don't skimp on this one. There's other places we can save money along the way. This is not an area where I believe in trying to save money. So again, 7'3", heavy, fast action, North Fork Composites X-Ray Blank, Daiwa Tatula. You can see I got the Fuji split grip on there. That's the SK reel seat. I'm a big fan of that. They have a cheaper reel seat. I think it's called the ECS, which is a blank exposed. I've used that in the past as well. I do the hidden threads. I don't like to feel a lot of threads up here on the foregrip. That's just me, but find a rod that fits your height. For me, 7'3" is really good. I could go longer if I'm offshore, but with this rod, I can still, I'm almost 6'3", so I'm a fairly tall individual, so 7'3" doesn't bother me too much if I'm skipping docks, unless I'm in really tight quarters. Then I'm going to go down to that 7-foot rod just to have a little more maneuverability, a little more accuracy with the shorter rod. But again, you guys, I can't emphasize it enough. This is an important rod in your arsenal. Spend some money on this one. Go to the top end of your budget. Don't put yourself in the hole. I'm not saying take your credit card over to Bass Pro Shops and go buy a $1,000 combo. That's not the idea here. The idea here is buy the best rod that you can afford when it comes to bottom contact rods, such as a jig rod. You won't regret it. It's super important. Now, let's talk about the lines that we're going to run. I am going to have one of two lines on my rods when I'm jig fishing. It's either going to be Shimano Mastiff or Sunline Sniper. These are my two favorites. I've messed with all the fluorocarbons. P-Line Tactical's not too bad. Berkley 100% fluorocarbon is not too bad. There's a lot of good fluorocarbons on the market, but again, it comes down to confidence. These two lines, this has been my staple. I've started messing with the Mastiff here a little bit recently, and I'm really kind of digging this. I feel like this line, if you remember the old version of 100% Trilene, it was fairly thick in diameter, but man, it was bulletproof. And then Seaguar and Vizix is a much more supple fluorocarbon. I feel like this one kind of splits the difference between those two in terms of diameter and how wiry it is, if you will. And then Sunline Sniper, it's just a great all-around rod. You can't really go wrong with the Sniper. And I'm either going to run 18, this one's 18, and that's 16. Those are my two line sizes for the most part. I don't fish a ton of super heavy cover in this part of the world, so you're never going to really see me in that 20 to 22 pound class line like you see some of the guys down south with. You got to figure out what your conditions are and choose your line size accordingly. If you can get away with 20 or 22, by all means. Our waters are a little clearer up here up north, and we fish a lot of grass. We just don't have a ton of heavy cover, so I'm going to downsize my line as much as I possibly can. So either 16 or 18 is what I'm going to spool. When it comes to jigs, there's a couple of basic things you have to look at in the construction of the jig too, you guys. First and foremost, look for a jig that has a quality hook. There's some decent baits out there. There's some really good baits out there, and there's some really crappy ones out there if you're out there buying your jigs from a retailer. So jigs that I really like, if I'm buying, Greenfish Tackle makes a great product. Biz Baits, incredible jigs. Super reasonably priced, and they're wire tied, which is nice too. I prefer a tied skirt. Some of the less expensive jigs are going to come with that little rubber band on it, and that's fine when you're fishing open water especially. I don't think it really matters. When I'm skipping though, I want a tied skirt. That skirt has to stay in place. I've gone out and skipped docks with some of the factory jigs. Strike King comes to mind in particular. It's unfortunate. I don't know if I have any laying right here, but the Denny Brauer structure jig for skipping is a great jig in and of itself. The problem with it is it has a rubber band, and eventually after a long day of skipping, it won't hold and it'll start to slide down. So the great thing about the Denny Brauer jig though is it's super flat. It skips like a dream. The line tie angle is really good for skipping. And then it has an O'Shaughnessy bend hook in it, which seems to pin the fish really good. So if you buy that jig, just wire tie it and cut that band off of there. Modify it a little bit. You don't have to go out and make jigs like I do. You can modify some of the existing stuff. So like that structure jig is great for skipping. And when I get those, I just wire tie them and cut the rubber band off. But the big thing is, I'm going to try to get my camera to focus there, is the direction of your line tie matters. We fish, like I said, tons of grass, so I want a line tie that orients itself vertically for the most part. If I'm out fishing rocks or gravel, if I get up north, we'll run into a lot more rocks and stuff like that. I'm not as particular. In fact, sometimes then I think maybe the horizontal might be a little bit better. I'm not 100% sure on that. I just know that the horizontal line ties don't come through the grass as well. So if you're like me and you fish a ton of grass, just look for a line tie that orients itself vertically like this one here. Hopefully that's showing up on camera. I know sometimes if I put my hand in there, it'll focus a little better. People tell me they don't like when I put my hand up, but I want you guys to be able to see what we're talking about. So line tie, look for the directional line tie that works for the structure that you're fishing. For grass, in my opinion, vertical is the only way to go. If you're fishing around wood, horizontal is better. We just don't have a lot of that around here. So primarily, I am going to tie to a vertical line tie, almost always. And again, simple colors. Don't get too crazy with it. And just when you're learning how to do this, you guys, leave your confidence baits at home, because one of the problems that we all struggle with is we're out there to try and get bit. And if we're struggling on this because we're new to it, it's too easy to pick up a confidence bait and get away from this. One of the things that I did, and I actually did it last night fishing offshore, is I left everything at home and I locked a jig in my hand. Forced myself to throw it and get some bites that way. And getting bites is the only way to gain confidence, you guys. So choose your rod. Pick out the best rod that you can for the money. If you're on the lower side of the budget, don't be afraid to run braid to fluorocarbon leader. I think that's a really good way to increase some sensitivity in some of those lesser expensive blanks. Just learn how to tie an FG knot so that you're going to be running 30-pound braid to maybe say an 18-pound leader. You need a knot that's going to be small and it's going to come through the guide. So learn how to tie the FG knot. I know it takes some practice and a little bit of patience, but once you get that thing dialed in, you guys, you can tie an FG knot really fast. I'm a perfect example of that. I stayed away from the FG knot for years and years, and then I learned how to tie it, went away from it, and now this year I'm back to just consistently tying the FG if I'm going to tie a leader, and it's really paying off. It's super strong, super small, comes through the guides beautifully, and it does allow you to take a lesser rod perhaps and get a little more sensitivity, because the braid's just going to transmit the bites a little bit better. If you go to a braid and fluorocarbon leader, though, just keep in mind you want to be a little more subtle in your movements with the rod, because the braid is going to make that bait react significantly more than a straight fluorocarbon will. So get the best rod and reel you can afford, pair it with some quality line, and find the right jig for the conditions that you fish. For me, it's grass. This is one that we pour. My buddy Jason and I both pour the same head. This is the Trokar Arky jig from Do It Molds. I pour mine on a BKK hook. The Mustad that it calls for is a perfectly good hook. And then one other thing that I do when I pour my own jigs, I downsize the hook almost always. I like a little more compact presentation. So you can see this is a 1/2 ounce. There's plenty of bite in that hook, but it's a 4/0, whereas the mold calls for a 5/0. It just makes for a little more compact presentation, and I think for me, that gives me more confidence. If the fish are a little finickier or they're short striking it, I just feel like I got a better chance to get the hook into them with a more compact hook. So that's something you can keep in mind as well. I'll show you another jig that I actually like. I buy these heads from Boss, but I want to show you, I want to find a 1/2 ouncer here. I got a bunch of them laying around right here. These are all 3/8. I gotta find it. Here's a 1/2 ounce. Nope, that's a 3/8. Bear with me, folks. I apologize. Wasn't really planning on going down this rabbit hole, but I do think it's important now that we're here. This is the Boss Sparky head. Skips pretty well. It's got the vertical line tie. I used to buy these and just paint them and then tie on them, but I've kind of dialed in on this Trokar head a little more. But look at the difference in hook. That thing is huge compared to that thing. 4/0 versus a 5/0. This is like, that's a monster hook. I kind of gotten away from this. I think that hook, for my preference, is a little too big, whereas this one seems to do the job the way I like it to be done. But this is a great option, you guys. If you don't want to pour jigs, but you want the ability to paint and tie your own, go check out Boss Jigs. They've got all kinds of different heads. They come unpainted. You can paint them, glue in whatever weed guard you want, and put whatever skirt you want on them. So if you don't want to pour jigs, but you want the ability to customize jigs, Boss is a great way to go. But yeah, that's kind of my rundown on jigs, you guys. I feel like this video is getting too long. I didn't want it to be an 18-minute video, but here we are coming up on 18 minutes, and I'm going to get out of here. I really appreciate you guys tuning in. We'll catch you on the next episode. Tight lines, everybody.